So, welcome and a very warm welcome to you, Sydney. And I'm Mary I'm a co-founder of Third Space with Steve Brett. And we're very thrilled to be hosting this first of a series of sessions with our contributors. And we're delighted, Sydney, that you're with us today. And Sydney Searchwell-Simpson is a writer, she's a thinker, she's an activist, and a lover of life, as she describes herself. And she will be exploring today her work, largely, in her thinking. She spent a lot of time exploring the conditioning and ways to decondition ourselves from the values and the sort of system that permeates all of our societies and is putting our world at great risk. So Sydney will talk together. You and Steve will talk for about 40 minutes together, and then we will open it up for any discussion, questions, engagement. And this call is being recorded, so it will be available for everybody afterwards. And I'd like to hand over to you now. So welcome, Sydney. Wonderful to have you.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Stephen. And thank you, Nika, for gathering us today for the creation of Third Space as well, which is just so incredibly valuable and needed in so many ways. And I knew for myself, I would love to start this session just with a prayer for us all to ground into. I think we all know that there's a lot, it seems like the crisis and catastrophe is really expanding. And I feel like having a point where we can all gather, whether you're here live or whether you're listening to this later on, can be a great point of connection. So for me, I just like to keep my eyes closed. If that feels good for you, you can also do that. And we're just going to connect to that which resides in the heart of us all. And that's who this prayer goes out to. It's reaching out to that source and just asking, actually starting with a gratitude for gathering us all in this moment, us in this space, but also gathering all of us as components of life into this incredibly historical moment that we're living in. My prayer is that you help us open up our hearts and our minds to the paths that can assist us in walking and becoming another way. I want to send a prayer of gratitude as well to the folks, the original inhabitants of the land that I'm standing on, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Ojibwe. I want to just say thank you, miigwech, to your ancestors, to those who are currently living and walking on this earth, and to those who are to come, because it is the land in which I have lived on, the land that you have stewarded for generations, that have offered me the foundation in order to remember who it is that we are, and allows me to do this work. So miigwech, thank you. I want to send a prayer out to all of those who are suffering from violence, from the repercussions and the effects of oppression around the world, whether that's in Gaza, Israel, Sudan, the Congo, whether that's deep in the Amazon, humans and beyond humans, the rivers, the waters, who are deeply, deeply polluted. I'm sending a prayer of healing and peace to them. And these prayers are not just prayers of words, but these are also embodied prayers, prayers that inspire us to act in ways that bring changes, that bring healing, that bring love onto this planet. I also want to send a prayer out to those who are causing harm, who are causing violence, to those who many might perceive as the enemy. I know that your hearts are disconnected, and that's the only reason why you are able to do the things that you are doing. And so I pray for the restoration of your heart, so that we may all walk forward into building and becoming the world that our hearts know is possible. And so with that, again, I want to close with gratitude and with hope that this session offers whatever medicine is needed for this time. And so just thank you. Thank you to that which unites us all. And I'm ready to begin.
Thank you, Sydney, for that beautiful prayer. And thank you for coming on this session with us. We're really, it's a lot of joy that we have you with us today. So thank you for coming. So I'd like to start by reading a quote, actually, from one of our favorite philosophers and visionaries, and from the last century, which feels very appropriate to everything we're going to be discussing today and talking about and sharing. And this is a quote from the great Jean Gebser, who was a Swiss-German philosopher in the last century. So this is what he said: "We have only one option. In examining the manifestations of our age, we must penetrate them with significant breadth and depth, that we do not come under their demonic and destructive spell. We must not merely focus our view on these phenomena, but rather on the humus of the decaying world beneath, where the seedlings of the future are growing, immeasurable in their potential and vigor. Since the insight into the energies pressing toward development aids their unfolding, the seedlings and inceptive beginnings must be made visible and comprehensible." So, Sydney, we think of you very much as an old soul, even though you're in a young body. And, you know, we both, Mary and I, feel we are bringing a really important and fundamental perspective on how we can respond to this meta crisis that we're in, and to this just this critical moment in human evolution. So to begin, what I wanted to ask you is, you talk about one of the things you talk about a lot in when we had our conversation previously was about the systems of domination. And I think what I'm wondering is, you know, and I think people would really like to know, how did you come to this place in yourself where you recognized that in spite of the system that we've learned and that we've been part of since we were very young, that there is another way for us to be human beings on the planet than the one that we've been taught by the system and societies that we're part of? How did you come to this place in yourself when you realized that?
Thanks for that question, Steve, and also for that brilliant, necessary quote. I think I had mentioned this before in our previous conversation, that I had a knowing when I was just young, and I was observing what was unfolding on the planet at the time. I just had a feeling. I was like, it doesn't have to be this way. And that was just something that would just keep playing over and over and over again, whether that was through witnessing the amount of homeless people that would be on the streets in Toronto, and like the ignoring of their humanity. You know, I would be 6 years old and think, I don't, like, there's another way that we can respond to this on an individual and on a collective level. And so I feel like that knowing of there being another way has been with me since, you know, I've come to this planet. And that's what inspired my activism. That's what inspired my inquiry into alternative ways of living and being. But I think when I think about the catalyst moment that really shifted that this relational crisis and the process of becoming another way was not just within ourselves, was not just with other humans, was not just with beyond humans, our plants and animal kin. It wasn't even just with the earth. It happened around at the end of 2023. This was when, at the time, we had been a few months into witnessing very violent images from the genocide in Palestine. I was trying to figure out, like, okay, what is my role? Like, I know that I'm here and I want to assist folks in remembering and waking up and stepping forward into true freedom. What is my role? What is my role? And I had this one moment where I was at this rock bed that I had built really powerful connection to. And whenever I needed space to just connect with the earth, I would go there. And I was observing my personal patterns of sort of trying to control life, trying to control the direction of my life, trying to control the path that I walked, or trying to control how to get from point A to point Z as a visionary. And in observing that pattern, I sort of understood, oh, okay, I've learned, and this is conditioning, I've learned that you can't trust life. You can't trust the greater unfoldment of life, that it's much safer to trust like institutions that promise things that they actually can't necessarily promise. And that having that recognition that the very thing I love, as you mentioned, Mary, I really do claim that I'm a lover of life, and that's why it is I do the work I do in this world. My drive to try to control life out of fear, because ultimately it is a tool that all systems of domination use in order to control people, was preventing me from really loving life in the way that I wanted to love life. And I knew that recognizing that, I could no longer move forward in integrity on my path if I was trying to control the path, the way that my life wished to unfold, in order to fulfill that sincere desire to be of service. And so the past 2-3 years of walking that path of understanding how to become another way in all of my relationships, from that's really rooted in this earth, and then that which is grounded in the greater sacred mystery that we're all a part of, and that we also are, because we are life. That really was the catalyst that made me think, okay, I have to become it. I can't just speak, because I can do that forever, but it's time to become.
Beautiful. Thank you. Yeah. I think one of the aspects of the system, as it were, that we've been sort of taught is that we're not really encouraged to question the system. We're encouraged more to conform to the system. I think, it's part of also what, the capitalist structure, where we're kind of in this produce and consume kind of world, and in that it kind of encourages us to stay asleep, stay asleep to the world as it actually is. And that has very different aspects to it, right? It's like, I think one of the things that I really get from your approach is awakening to the world as it actually is. And that there's a lot in that, right? A person that we have a lot of respect for, who was a spiritual activist called Vimala Thakur, she's from India. She said, perception of bondage is the first step to liberation. And so one of the things it would be great to hear you speak more about is this kind of allowing ourselves to recognize and feel what is wrong with the world and what is right with the world. I mean, what is beautiful about the world, and also what is destructive about the world that we're part of. I mean, some people would say that can be, self-defeating, and that you end up just feeling depressed or whatever. But it seems like actually connecting to the world as it is, and not allowing that connection not to immobilize us, but to connect us, seems like, in a way, a first step towards the kind of perspective you're speaking about.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I appreciate that deeply and dearly. Because I think, in relationship to what you had mentioned earlier about how systems of domination require you to not question what it is that we're taught and told, and what it is that we're taught and told are not really reflective of truth. And I think that truth can sort of be held as this one thing, but I really define truth as just what is. It's the whole picture of what is, free from our projections, free from our ideas, even free from our hope, which is the thing that was a little hard for me to let go of, but just what is right here, right in front of me, the wholeness of it. And I think that is one of the things that has assisted me in building my own capacity to stand solid in this moment, is the fact that I was able to pause and just observe. And thankfully, also having studied history, that gave me great context about where this present moment came from. It's just like a fruit. It's like the seed planted years ago, but now we're just really seeing the culmination. But to pause and to witness the pain and the horror and the separation and the division, and even to notice the part of me that wanted to judge it, because that would make me feel really safe. I'm not going to judge and shame that aspect of us that really wants to label this moment as all of these things, because ultimately it's just a lot. But to pause and to notice the wholeness of it, because I think in witnessing the pains that we have been witnessing, we've also been able to see moments of deep, profound beauty. And funnily enough, in reading the essay that you and Mary wrote about your time in Cairo, I saw that we had a bunch of people who were gathering in order to protest the genocide in Palestine from all of these countries. And you mentioned witnessing those moments of humanity, the other aspect of humanity that can be easy to forget when we're witnessing so much of the shadow aspects of us. And so I think that's what brings up to being present to witness what is. And I think the more present we are, the more we're able to meet this moment, because we see it all. We see it all. We can hold as much as we can, not by ourselves, but together. And we can meet it much more effectively and efficiently from that point.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Following on from that, Mary wrote in a recent article that she wrote for Third Space. She said, despite technology's gift of interconnectedness, never have so many felt so alone.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was sort of a very sort of poignant truth about the kind of state of things now. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I know when we've spoken before, you've talked about the meta crisis as being a crisis of relationship. Mm-hmm. And it would be great if you could speak about that some more.
Yeah. I think that in speaking about that, we have to address the very necessary survival need we have to belong, to belong to the earth, to belong to a community, to belong to a people. And I think when I think about the crisis, people have been calling it an epidemic of loneliness that we're all living through. What that's rooted in, I read this really fabulous book, and I wish I remembered the author's name. And now I'm even forgetting the title of the book. I'll share it with you.
Yes,
after
please.
this. We could include it in the email. He was actually a British author, and he was doing research about the social reasons for the rise of depression across the world. And he did such fabulous research about what happens when people are not connected to personal value, are not connected to a community of people, are not connected to a sense of meaning and purpose. And he was saying how essentially his whole thesis was that in treating depression just as a biochemical issue, we're not looking at like the deeper root causes of why it is that, as you know, technologically, some might say, we've reached a massive peak, but spiritually and just heart to heart, there just seems to be a deficit in how it is that we connect. And there's so much to say about that, but I really do think about the quality of our connection and the way in which that's implicated by the systems of domination and oppression. I think because we're all trained in this very capitalistic mindset in view of give and take. And it's interesting, that language of give and take, which is very different from the language of give and receive, because taking requires taking something that's not actually being given. So there's almost like a sense of entitlement that's also deeply rooted in the values of capitalism. But there's a lot of transaction in our relationships. And even nowadays, we have, some people can, receive their groceries, can do all of these things without ever having to interact with another human being. But we know what happens to babies when they don't have that human to human contact. They perish because it's something that we can't survive within. And so what's coming up around this question and the larger relational crisis that we're existing in, is that the quality of our relationships, because we're inherently in relationship, has sort of been siphoned by these very extractive mindset and values of like, I give so I can take, or like I get to take from these people, or from these ideas, and like not care about the implications, not care about the costs, because it doesn't affect me. And the ripple effects that has on our web of relation, I think that causes that sense of deep disbelonging, that deep sense of, I'm here on this earth, I'm surrounded by people, I can speak to somebody in Australia in an instant, but do I feel seen? Do I feel a part of something bigger than myself? Do I feel like I'm contributing to a larger community and our direction? And so there's a lot to say about the surface level. I think a lot of our connections can become very surface level. And it's unfortunate because we're yearning, we need that. It allows us to thrive and survive in this world. And that's why I really believe that part of our healing comes shifting the quality of our relations and the foundation that they're rooted in. Can we shift our relationships from being this give and take dynamic, this transactional dynamic that we've inherited from generations within our families, within who have just been trained within capitalism, and can we shift into something that's more deeper rooted in the embodied practice of deep unconditional love and a deep witnessing of like, I am here and you are here and we're here together in this moment. We're a part of something that's so much bigger than we could ever name or know. Like, this is no coincidence. How do we honor life? How do we honor the life within each other? And that's very different from the extractive, exploitative mindset of like, what do I need to take from you in order to access my aliveness? Because we only have to take from other people when we don't feel connected to that. So I feel like I went a bunch of places, but that's a deep question. It's an important question.
Yeah, I guess a question that people, would ask, are going to ask is like, how do we build this capacity for reciprocity that you're talking about? I mean, I know for yourself, you've spoken to me about the part that nature has played in that, because if we start to connect to the natural world as one example of how maybe we can help to build that capacity in ourselves, is if we look at the natural world, we see this kind of natural reciprocity that's continuously taking place.
Yeah.
And it's something that, you know, we haven't been taught to value and to learn from ourselves, whereas more traditional cultures, because they were much more integrated into the natural world, I think understood that reciprocity in a deeper way, and were fed by it, but, you know, nourished by it, actually, in a way that it's far more difficult for us now, when we're sort of encouraged in a very sort of individualistic world to kind of look after ourselves. And so, you know, the natural world is certainly one way in which I think we can build that capacity. It would be great to hear from you. How do we, because I think people recognize that
Yes.
this is something that's really missing, a sense of relationship, community, connection is so much undervalued and has been, you know, displaced and destroyed in so many ways. So, I mean, how can we start to build, regain that connection? I think is going to be something that people would really love to hear what you have to say about it.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, I know for myself, like you had mentioned, a lot of my own capacity and my own repairing of the severances in my own relationships has come from reconnecting with the earth in a very intuitively guided, like ancestrally guided space, because I think it's also important to recognize that we all come from traditional cultures, deep, you know, and just through modernization and other things, some cultures have grown away and moved away, you know, and I think we see a lot of that in Europe as well. But we all come from traditional cultures. So I think it's a collective human inheritance that we can all reconnect to by going to the source, which is the earth. And I think, like you said, in being connected with the earth, I'm able to observe the truth that life takes care of life in ways that are just so profound and have just allowed life to continue to evolve. And I think a big question I ask myself to expand upon what I receive from the earth and to move forward into my human to human communities is really just asking myself, like, what is it that I can give in this moment where I am with the resources that I have? I think that that's a very important question, because right now, as we witness the world come apart, it can be very easy for us to focus on how do I solve the genocide unfolding in Gaza? How do I solve the, you know, impending war unfolding in Iran? Like, how do I do that? And that can get us sort of spiraling and it's just too big, it's too big. But when we understand the relational implications of systems of domination, we're also able to understand the relational implications of truth, of liberation, of freedom, of love. And that starts within our local communities, the people that we live with in our households, the people that we live with on our streets, in our apartment buildings, our communities, and we just expand. So it's like seeing the problems that are unfolding in this world, whether that is, I'll use an example, access to healthy and nutritious food. As the economy makes that, you know, less and less accessible because the cost of living is not meeting the wages that people need to survive, on top of the deeper corruption that exists within our food system. You know, how is it that we can look at this issue not as an individual, a problem one individual has to solve, but like, what are the resources within my community? What are my internal resources? What are my larger resources within my household? What are my larger resources within my community? And can I take action towards having a conversation with my neighbor and just like connecting with them in a way that I previously haven't, to see, like, you know, like, who are you? What matters to you? Like, are you noticing these things in this world too? I'm really interested in building something like this. Is that would benefit the community? How can we start? I really just think about building up, like seeing the networks that are available within and beyond us, and just sort of taking that first step into initiating deeper change. And that can be, it can be, you know, I think a part of it also is about knowing where we feel called, knowing where we feel inspired, because not everybody feels inspired to organize, and that's okay. You know, you don't want to force yourself to do something that you're not called to go towards. So coming clear within yourself, where do I feel inspired to act, and where do I feel inspired to change? If that's just, you know, practicing small acts of daily kindness, asking about people's day, it could be even something as I can't call it a small because it's major, acknowledging people's humanity when you're walking on the street, you know, but it's really just about, again, presencing where it is that you are and seeing where can I make the kind of change that I want to see in this world exactly where it is that I am. And can there, and having conversations with people who could be impacted by that. And it's amazing what kind of networks that are just waiting to be reawakened and reignited from an individual just stepping forward and trying to make this world more loving, trying to make this world more generous, trying to make this world more reflective of truth, you know, of the direction that we want to go. So that's what shows up for me when I think about that.
I love what you're saying about that, Sydney. And I love the fact that you're pointing it back to these very simple actions. You know, we don't have to be big organizers. We don't have to be sort of feel like there's some sort of big actions we need to take, but actually they can be quite small. But those small actions can connect us to something much larger than ourselves. And I think that kind of, to me, is what you're pointing to. And I feel that is, you know, it's actually much more significant than one might think, because I think what you start to discover is that you are connected to everything. And I think that's it's going from a place where we feel, you know, out of these systems of domination that you speak about, where we feel separate, we feel isolated, we feel like, well, a lack of agency in a sense to change things. We start to feel, in that connection, we start to feel that we're part of something much larger than ourselves, that we're not separate from.
Exactly.
And that to me is like really the whole thing. I mean, everything is in that. And it sounds, you know, ridiculously simple, but actually it really changes things. And I think you've probably found that in your own life. I've certainly found that in mine, that, you know, the more I connect to people and the things that people are doing to try and change things, the more that inspires that change in myself, and the more it awakens a sense of responsibility for what we're all part of, you know. So that's just, I'm just responding really to what you just said, because I think it's so important, because people think, well, how do we get to this point, you know, where we feel alive again, you know, where we feel connected again? And I think it's actually through these small actions, you know, of like, and as the other point you said that I think is really important is that we're all different. Like, what is it that we feel called to? I love that about what you said. I think we're all called to different things, and that is what life is all about. There's so much, you know, we're all different. And I think it's finding what is it that I feel called to can change things really dramatically.
Absolutely. And I'm so happy that you mentioned that point of responsibility that comes from feeling like you're a part of something. Because I think about, you know, we connect on this before about like something as simple, which is not really that simple, but something that appears as simple as like littering, you know. And for years, it just blew my mind, like why it is that people didn't feel responsible for their communities and for the earth that stewarded them by just throwing trash wherever it is that they went. And it helped me understand, oh, the problem is if people don't feel connected to a community, they're disconnected from a sense of responsibility to something beyond just like their individual preservation, their individual needs, their individual desires, you know. And that's something that capitalism and its root of like scarcity and its root of profit really disconnects us from. And so I really do think that there's something really real and unfolding in how can we cultivate that sense of I am responsible for myself and my actions. I'm also responsible for this world and this community, and we're responsible for each other's well-being. And that comes from those small, what seem like small efforts, but that actually like ripple beyond. It reminds me of a thing that I've been sitting with a lot lately, is, and this is part of the aspect of the consciousness of domination that has been really liberating for me to walk, is no longer trying to convince or to control people to seeing my perspective, which I know where that comes from. And it comes from a very sincere belief that like, this is the way. I need to force you to become free. But that doesn't make sense. You know, you can't force people into freedom. And it's coming to a point of more like, my point of power is here. And so I want to become, and I hope that this inspires people to ask themselves this question, to delve into some self-inquiry. How can I be the experience for other people? How can I become a pathway so that other people can experience this world that I feel in my heart is possible, and allow that to do the talking? Because there's such power in, and I witnessed this when people experience kindness, or when people experience the what I feel is the innate generosity of the human spirit. When people experience that, it could really inspire them to tap into what they already have within themselves, and to meet somebody else with that same thing, with that same sort of experience. And that's what I'm yearning for now, is less of an intellectual understanding of what is possible, but more and more people walking the messy and doesn't have to be perfect pathway of becoming the experience, because that experience is undeniable. You know, you can have your thoughts about, oh no, it's just human nature that, you know, we're just inherently violent, and we're just inherently, you know, divisive, and we're just inherently, you know, always in conflict that's not regenerative. But that's not necessarily true. And so I think people need to have experiences of that truth in order to have that truth awakened within themselves. And then, you know, onward and onward and onward. The ripple is profound.
Mm. Beautiful. And it strikes me also in what you're saying, there's something about leadership there. You know, what is leadership? Because, you know, I mean, without actually sort of consciously thinking about oneself or whatever as leaders, I think, you know, just like you're saying, it's not about explaining to people, well, this is how you do it, you know, kind of thing. But it's actually about, it really comes down to, I think, what you were talking about, which has to do with connection and care. Because when that starts to happen, you're not really telling people, well, you should do this, or you should do that, or this is the way things are, or whatever. But it's actually what really concerns you is your own doing this for yourself because you feel like this is the most important thing. And that has reverberations, right? It has reverberations on others. And I think one of the things that we really need in these times is that kind of leadership, not leadership that is, you know, about, you know, the ambitions of the individual to be a leader, but about actually people that genuinely care and are concerned, because that has reverberations. I think people feel it. When somebody cares, people feel it. And I think another thing that sort of brings me to is something you've spoken about, and I think is really interesting, is that one of the things that happens, I think, in our cultures is that we may have certain experiences which you know, might be called spiritual experiences or whatever, and they often end up with us becoming more focused on our individual experience. And then you have, activism, which is sort of very focused on sort of trying to change things. And I think I think when you naturally start to connect and care, then I think there's some coming together of those things in which they're not separate any longer. They're all part of one thing, actually. And I think that's what I find very appealing about you, the way you speak about all of this, is that it's really, we so easily get into these silos because that's part of the way we've been educated and the taught to feel is the only way to do things. Whereas I think what you're talking about is actually sort of stepping out of these silos and finding your own way, in a sense, to connect to what you deeply care about.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I really do feel, I think because I had operated in what was seen as two separate realms of like, there are spiritual spaces and then there are activist spaces. And I think that the times in which they have engaged with each other has created a lot of pain, like with like spiritual bypassing that has gotten people to sort of feel like, if you feel a sense of peace during these times, that automatically means that you're suppressing your feelings. And I just don't think that that's true. Like when I think about the gift that we've been given from these ancient spiritual traditions all around the world, at their core, at their root, at their heart, at their essence, reflects the truth of oneness, which we've spoken about before in our previous conversation and even just now. But it also reflects what many traditions speak about of like our true nature, whether that's like Sufism or whether that's within the Yoga Sutras. Like there's a deeper understanding that there are physical and spiritual realms, and here is sort of like where it is that we bring them into complete harmony. And understanding and seeing what's unfolding in this world, I could see the moving off of people within spiritual spaces being like, this is just for us. We're just going to be doing our thing over here. In activist spaces, we're going to do our thing over here. But there's so much power in repairing our ability to see the way that they're already connected. Because I think if we're embodying the virtues and the values that come from these ancient traditions of compassion and of responsibility and of devotion and of a commitment to truth, the world that we live in, just I can feel it, I can see it, and it is so beautiful. It is so beautiful, the possibility. Even when I just think about the communities, when we have somebody who's deeply connected to what those spiritual traditions are grounded in, but they're really rooted in the present moment in their body and becoming that pathway, like it's absolutely beautiful, the possibilities that can emerge, the kind of healing that can emerge. And I really hope within the rest of my lifetime here to help bridge that gap, because I think it repairs what we were speaking about earlier of, we have this technologically evolved world, but spiritually there's a lot of disconnect. And so what happens when we bring balance, from the unseen, when we bring balance to our virtues, our values, to the mystery that we're a part of, and how can that affect how it is and what it is that we create, and how it is that we relate, and how it is that we respond to this moment. I'm thinking a lot about how it is that the consciousness of domination, if we're not aware of it, can impact our response to this moment. And if it impacts our response, it impacts what comes from this moment. But if we're connected to the deep core of the human spirit, our true nature, which doesn't have to be this disembodied. We have a lot of ideas of what our true nature is, but I'm a real knower of what, Muji, very powerful spiritual teacher, mentions of, like, when you let go of all the things that you've been taught that you are, your natural self arises, and you can't project ideas onto it. Like it's it's such an open experience. And I just think a lot about how, yeah, there's such creative possibility and potentiality in us grounding into that space and allowing that to assist how it is that we respond, because then we're planting new seeds. We're planting seeds from a deeper truth of life and of who it is that we are. And we're not planting seeds that are rooted in pain that has to be processed, of pain that has to be seen. But we can't be that, let that be what it is that we plant. Because that can't produce anything but more of that. So yeah, there's beauty in bringing forward and bringing down spiritual truths and spiritual experiences. The message of, I think, many great teachers across time and culture.
Beautifully put. Thank you, Sydney.
Thank you.
So I'm wondering if we might open it up for people to just, comment or ask questions, or I think that would be excellent. Anybody has questions? Mary, do you want to speak about that?
Yeah, no, I think I just want to say thank you, Sydney and Steve. That was, that short time, I think you took us on a deep dive into some really important points. So I don't know if anyone else, Lorraine, or if anyone has anything they would like to say or comment.
Yeah, just maybe raise your hand, and and then we can.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, I've got to unmute. Nika, can you unmute Lorraine? Or Lorraine, you can unmute yourself, I think, actually. That's how it works.
Yeah, you should be able. There you go.
Yeah, I was waiting to be unmuted. There was so much in it. Thank you so much. There was a lot of questions I had, so I really don't know where to start with this because so much was arising. I think I don't want to get too specific about anything. I think one issue I had is about ideologies, and I think in our culture we all want to accept all ideologies, and an issue that has arisen for me is when another ideology wants to impose their ideology on you to the point of annihilating anybody that doesn't have the same ideology. There's an issue that arises there that has become an issue for me. I'm sort of grappling with that at the moment. What do you do when, because then you're at risk, you're vulnerable. So that was one, but I was listening to your what you said about the natural self and the spirit, and a few things come up for me there because you mentioned a book, a title and an author, which I didn't know, but a few books and series come up for me with John Vervaeke for meaning, and he talks a lot about wisdom. And then Nicholas Carr has done some research on neuroscience where our brains are actually rewiring and changing, responding to technology. And Sherry Turkle also has done some research to show, even a phone on the table impacts our relationship. So that's just how. So that I was relating to with that, and the quality of relationships that you were talking about. So I think, how we're relating to each other is so different, and I'm just overwhelmed by all of it, really. But that was one thing. What I really wanted to share, you mentioned about Earth taking care of itself, and I was thinking that made me think of Gaia theory. But also I was thinking about how we're missing the sublime in our life, that religion used to provide that. And although we might be spiritual individually, I think where people used to attend church or group meetings, and there were, even the cathedrals in my culture provided that kind of experience of the sublime, which we're missing. And that made me think of somebody called Frank White wrote a book on the overview which is about astronauts, how they really changed their perspective of Earth once they'd seen it and wanted to nurture Earth. And I was wondering how that could be harnessed in some way. So I'm sorry, I had so many thoughts as you were talking, so I've just sort of poured it all out, not all of it, but much of it. So I'll let somebody else sort of feedback on some of that, perhaps. So
would you like to respond to that, Sydney? I think there was quite a lot in there.
Yeah, happily. Thank you, Lorraine, for just sharing. I understand those moments where it's like, yeah, there's a lot going on, and because that helps me also understand, okay, like what do people have more, or like what does this idea help instigate in another? I won't speak in order of the like questions, but I'll go with like what arrives first. I know I really resonate with what you said about like the sublime, and that, yeah, sort of having this like connection to something sacred and beyond, which a lot of folks around the world express through their architecture, through their sacred architecture in mosques and churches and temples. And there is that desire to sort of like, I guess, like step beyond actually what seems to be very like mechanical and ordered and orchestrated into something that's like, whoa, like it almost connects us to beauty. And that's a very important aspect. I know I've been connecting deeply to Sufism lately. Like that's an important aspect of an expression of the divine from which we all stem. And I wonder, I know for myself, part of my own connection to the sublime comes from the natural world, which I really feel is like my church. And like, this is where it is that I'm able to find the most sublime beauty in like the crisp sounds and sights and flow of like a river flowing, or watching ants, like make tunnels and all those little things. But I think that it's so important for us as humans to connect to the sublime, however it is that we can, to connect to points of beauty, because I think that also connects us to maybe even what it is that we're for, like what it is that we want to preserve, why it is that we love life, and why it is that we want to continue to honor life. And so I really resonate with that deep sense of yearning for that, and how to get that through a really present lived experience that's less connected to like these mechanical, technological products, which have value, right? But it's not the everything. There's so much more beyond. So I hope it speaks to that. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, again, I just wanted to respond to what you said. I think what I was connecting with the sublime through nature, I mean, just looking at the night sky can give you that sense. But I think what church provided was a collective sense of the sublime. I think that's what I was getting at, that we don't seem to have that anymore. There's not a place where we connect through that spiritual kind of moment. It's more of an individual experience, and I'm just wondering, that's more of this sort of disconnection from everybody else. We may be connecting with things individually, which I do, and in my art practice, that provides me with so much meaning and sense and purpose in my life. But there's not a connection to others through that, only through my audience, but that's really quite rare, not frequent.
Absolutely.
That was just an observation. I don't have any answers. I only have more questions. I'm afraid.
That's real. That's real. And I know for myself, cultivating a community of folks who wanted to connect with that has been very supportive for me. In some ways, creating different pockets of communities that connect with the sublime. But you're right, it's less a part of our day-to-day structure, whereas just a couple decades ago it was almost expected. Every Sunday you gather, that's just the rule. And as it becomes less of a rule, for whatever reason, beyond good or bad, what was the value that we were receiving from that, and how can we intentionally try to cultivate that, you know, because it has value and meaning to us. It's important for our own sense of connectedness to life and to each other. So I'm happy that you have a bit of that in your art practice, and maybe, you know, other artists like myself, we were talking earlier, form our own.
Through nature too. I don't disagree with what you said. You know, there's a sense of awe and wonder within nature, but when it's a very sort of personal experience, so it's something about shared experience, I think, that I'm trying to say connects us, which is what I feel is missing somehow. And that comes into that disconnection, that changing the way we relate to each other as well.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I'm just sort of taking in what's happening. You talked about reality and truth, and I really, you know, I'm spending all my time just trying to figure out what that is. I haven't got to the point where I'm trying to tackle it. I just want to, you know, there's so much fake news, and what the media focuses on feeds us with what we should focus on, and I'm trying to unravel that, because I think that's really a big issue at the moment. And I know you sort of mentioned some specific things that happen in the world, and I think there are so many things happening all over the world, to be honest, in lots of places that are as much of an issue, but I think we tend to focus on what we're fed in the news, and that really worries me. I think we because we're not seeing reality.
Mary, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to pick up, because there's a lot in what you're bringing up, Lorraine. Lots.
I know, I'm
sorry. But I wanted to come back to the point you and Sydney were just talking about community and this sense of collective in relationship to the sublime. And I'm curious, Sydney, because we live in a very, as we know, a very irreligious time, particularly in the West, you know, and even spirituality has got it's not as, how can I say, it's not as embraced by our culture. Yeah. We've become a little averse, you know, and for lots of reasons. Yeah. And I was wondering whether, based on what you were saying before, that actually community, in the way that you were speaking about it, is one of the places where we can start to experience the sublime, maybe in a different way than we do when we're in nature, or we're engaged in the flow of art or whatever, creativity, where we connect to something sublime. But I'm thinking that touch point where we really are connected to a community, to human beings, I've almost felt like that is an opening, another portal to a new experience of the sublime. And I'm curious on your thoughts on that, Sydney.
Yes, I really do resonate with that. And it's interesting because I think when I've entered spaces to share or to speak, I'm also often internally navigating how much of God can I speak to, because of the moving away from God in our society. And I think a lot of that is grounded in a lot of religious trauma. So I understand where that comes from. And it's interesting because I'm writing about this in the book that I'm currently writing, around how even and this is a difference I'm really trying to ground into, of ideas versus experience, because religion hasn't been freed from the consciousness of domination either. And I think that that's why a lot of people are like, no, I don't want to connect to anything that could be beyond this earth, which is interesting, because to me, I'm like, the divine is so deeply rooted in this earth. But I don't want to connect with that because I've been taught that God is this punishing, and religion is just like this punitive, like I'm on you, watching every single step, where you can't exist. There's no room for grace. There's no room for any of that. And I can speak to the fact that in my experience of the divine and all of the ways that they express themselves, that's just not true. That's just not true, but you can see that when we get to the heart of religious traditions all around the world, when we look at the heart and we're able to discern what comes from humanity's rooted in domination consciousness and control and power over, and making sure that we can control where societies go, except so we can expand beyond that. But I absolutely agree. There's something beautiful, I mean, about when we can experience the sublime in each other's humanity. And maybe I'm thinking too, like maybe that's what we're really missing and yearning, is the ability to, in our relationships with each other, to witness something deeply sacred, something that touches us and moves us and opens us rather than closing us off, which I think a lot of our human engagements as of late have been really like, oof, like how deep can I go in? How open can I be to our connection? And yeah, I feel like there's something to say about one, both the intra and the inter-religious trauma, and us navigating how to repair those ruptures and step into being able to experience the divine, not just through text and not just through rituals and practices, which are important. Those came from the experience of the divine, but to experience it in each other, you know, soul to soul, heart to heart. And I know that I think is what can really help us remember and build, something with now.
No, thank you. Because I think in that, there's a dissolution of separation too. I think that's what struck me also in the earlier conversation, that when we let down our own guard and our own ideas and our own, like you were saying, Lorraine, ideologies, when we put that aside and meet, there's something transcendent almost in that very human connection that, that's,
I think that's why I was sort of talking about the sublime rather than religion.
Yeah.
So an acknowledgement of something beyond ourselves, beyond any doctrine, and about the overview effect. When you're looking at the planet from space, it's not necessarily religious, but there's a feeling of the sublime. It's not, you know, there's no particular religion that relates to. It's a human experience for everybody. Yeah. And so it's universal. Religions tend to be ideology, you know, that there is an ideology of kind of nurturing and caring within that for the planet, rather than doctrines or I think ritual is important too. But I think that's what I'm saying, that's what's missing, and there's something that's needed that brings us together with that feeling, without a doctrine or a specific ideology, perhaps.
Yeah.
But I don't
embrace, even one I think that has enough capacity to embrace it all. Because I know for myself, I connect to like every tradition I've ever encountered. Like I go in and I dive deep, and I find the thread that holds them all together. So I think it's important to honor the distinction. But I think as we build our capacity, our individual capacity and our individual connection to see within, but to also see beyond the divisions that, you know, in this world, we seem very like distinct. I'm like, this is us, this is who we are, this is how we do things, this is how we think. But to sort of get to the heart and witness that I have such a love for the sublime, I can witness it wherever it is. And I can meet you at that point of wanting to connect there. And to mention what you had mentioned earlier, Lorraine, sometimes there is some grief and sadness because not everybody will be able to meet you at that point. There will be people who will be like, nope, this is my idea, this is my ideology, this is what I think is right and correct. And then that is for you, or at least when I've had experiences like that, I'm like, okay, you feel that way, that's fine. I'm going to stand and I'm going to embody in what I know is true for me. And I've found in those experiences, you know, and this is not a situation where my life has been at risk or anything. So, you know, you can't apply that to that. But when I think that has allowed people to soften, and I think that when we find people who are very rigid in their ideas and their ideologies and approaches, that's coming from something that we ourselves don't have to carry, but when we can acknowledge it, it can allow us to find our point of power. And it's like, I'm going to stay true to what it is that I know. And I'm going to still see the sublime in you, even when maybe even my own defenses are trying to be like, no, I think it's part of that is being so committed to what's at the core of us all, that I'm able to see it everywhere, even when it might be deeply hidden, deeply covered, deeply veiled.
One other thing I'd like to just introduce into this very fascinating discussion that's happening right now is that perhaps what we're talking about is also a new consciousness, in a way, in the sense that I get the feeling from what's being expressed that what is emerging is not the desire to belong to a particular religion as we might have felt in the past, but rather to find this connection to the sublime in many different ways. And let's say, to me, perhaps that's one of the gifts of this development of the individual, is that we're feeling a freedom to find that for ourselves, find that connection in the way that we feel drawn to. I think that's one of the beauties of this new, what I feel is a new consciousness emerging, which is not a return to, we need to go back to religion, but rather we need to find these ways of connecting to the sublime that we feel called to. And I think that somehow brings together the individual with something sublime in a very in a way that is something that is emerging right now. I feel, which is a very exciting possibility, and one that is going to perhaps enable us to reconnect to the sublime in a way that in many ways our culture and our societies have lost. So yeah, just wanted to introduce that.
I think maybe that's why I was suggesting that as long as we accept other ideologies, we can meet at that point. But it's when there are ideologies that insist on imposing on every other ideology that then becomes an issue, because then you have to fight to maintain your own, otherwise you're just consumed. So that's what I'm grappling with is, I've grown up in a culture where I accept others, whatever their ideology is. But if they seek to annihilate me, then how can I, there has to be a defense to that, doesn't there? Which is kind of sets it all out of balance. Maybe there's this chaos and order thing, and not sure how to resolve that one at all. But it is an issue, I think, that there has to be a defense of your beliefs in some way if another is imposing theirs upon you.
What do you think, Sydney? Do you have some thoughts about that?
Let me sit with that for a minute. I find it's hard for me to offer anything because of lack of context, which is okay. If you don't want to share anymore, that's like totally okay. But
I think jihad, for instance, demands that the infidels die. So how do you, I have no issue with any religion. In fact, but that is imposing on me or others. So how can that be reconciled?
Yeah, I'm actually going to turn to this book that I've been reading over the past few months. And I'm happy that you mentioned specifically jihad, because I think that within, if there's one religious traditions that I think many people struggle to relate to is definitely Islam, because of what we have seen unfolding in this past century. And I think one of the things in my own learning of and connection to Islam and Sufism is like the true meaning of jihad. And I'm gonna just find that right now.
If I could just clarify, it's not Islam per se.
Yes.
I don't want to, I don't have an issue with any religion or philosophy unless it's imposed on others. That was my point. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that because we have seen the implications of a disconnected expression of religious traditions that comes from a point of control and fear rather than a sharing in the sublime, because to me, I'm like, that's the very heart of it. And honestly, collectively, I don't think it makes sense for me to pretend that I have an answer, because it's complex. It's complex to explore, like when it comes to the safety of people's lives, in having to, when an ideology is being pushed upon them. That's a situation I've never had to be in. And if I wanted to give an answer, I would want to sit with it more deeply. But if it were to come from personal experience of someone very passionate being like, nope, your way is wrong. We spoke about this, Steve, in our last conversation, the limitations of when people are operating from a point of there is one right way. This is when we have to look within ourselves and pause, because this is the only thing we really have ultimate control over. And almost decide, like, there are some rocks that don't want to be moved. And if people are very attached to their ideologies and they've attached their identity to their ideologies, that's work that's so much deeper than anything that we do can ever touch. And the consequences of that will be the consequences, whatever it is. And I think what I try to do in my own life and what I try to do with this domination consciousness work is just keep turning people within to their point of power, where our ability to control the world is very limited, but our ability to impact the world is not. We're always doing it regardless. And so coming to this point, if someone is projecting their ideas onto me or what they think is right, I see that pattern in them, and then I have the right to choose how I wish to respond, whether that's like with a boundary of like, I really understand that you're passionate and you care about this, but I have chosen a different path, and I pray that you can accept me at that, and I'll accept you where you are, and softening into that, and I get why our defenses arrive, because we want to protect. We feel like somebody crossing our boundary and being like, you have to do this way, you have to live this way. Our defenses are naturally going to come up, and that's okay. They're there to protect. But when we can, if it's our decision to decide, I want to live open, I want to live in a way that I can accept people where they are as they are, I have to decide, okay, I see you, I see the pattern that's controlling you, this pattern of like, I need to gain control over other people because I'm attached to my ideology, but I'm not going to participate in that game. I'm not going to judge you for being in that game. I'm not going to participate in it. And I know for me, whether that's in small situations from my family to larger situations of the way that I choose to live my life, that has been very empowering for myself to walk forward, knowing anybody can say anything and project anything that they want for me. But I'm rooted in what is true for me. I choose to that.
Sorry. If part of your ideology is to allow people to have their own ideologies, do you need to defend that ideology, I suppose? Because I understand accepting other ideologies is part of my ideology. Yeah.
Could I just this point? I think there's
Yeah, go ahead.
I think in a way that's a very probably quite a personal reckoning as to how we do that. But I wanted to just say, Sydney, that that I think in a way a defense, what are we defending, right? And I think that's what I loved what you were saying, because if we stay true to our own, even if we're, you know, we're in a fairly extreme. There have been people throughout history, and there are currently people who are in quite extreme circumstances who don't depart from their own, from what we're talking about, from their connection to something deeper. And I think, you know, it's obviously people are going to respond differently in these circumstances, but those that have remained true to it actually are lights to humanity, I feel. I mean, if I look back in history, the people in the very extreme, if we take very extreme circumstances, that have influenced me the most are the people who have remained true to this, to the depth of this, which is not really, we could call it an ideology, but to the truth of our connectedness. And they've remained true to that even under all circumstances, which doesn't mean not taking steps to protect yourself physically if you're physically at risk or your family is. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that I think is a defense of one's, we could put in ideology to use that language. I think it's a really important point what you were saying there, Sydney, because I think when we feel threatened, it's often the time when we can be tempted to lose our own connection and rootedness in that, and then we end up being part of what you're talking about, part of the mess that we're kind of in the world. But it takes a lot, and you know, and I agree with you. I liked what you said. There's no prescribed way, but there is no, you know, because obviously context matters a lot. But I think this is really core, and so thank you both. All right, so I think we're getting a little bit close to the end. Is there anything else that I had actually one thing I can take advantage of having the program was something that you said in the beginning that I think does relate to some of the multiple questions you had, Lorraine, too. You said you were talking earlier about holding it all, this place of being able to hold it all. It was quite early on in the conversation, Sydney, and I was struck by that because I think there's a power in being in holding it all, but not necessarily, that doesn't necessarily mean one agrees with everything or one doesn't call out wrong. You know, things that are wrong. When I say call out, one doesn't. Obviously, we discern what's going on, what actually is, what's going on. And I think there's something about being able to hold it, being able to hold that too, in a way that we can, that the way to respond to that can emerge, if you know what I mean, rather than versus reacting and following the older patterns of you know, that we're all conditioned with. But I think that's very important because there are some, you know, there is some thinking in the world that, you know, one never calls, one never, you use the word, we don't judge. And I think judging is quite a loaded word. And I agree with you. I think when we judge and separate, but I think there's a way we can name without separating. That's different. And I think that's important too. So I was just struck by that because I think then it does allow us to hold it all because it also allows us to hold context so we can understand, you know, some of the things that are very difficult in the world within the context that they're emerging in. You know, I just wanted to pick that up.
Yeah, absolutely. Judgment is a huge theme, I think, in this work. And its relationship, I think, to what it is that I shared and you renamed of that ability to hold it all. I think a lot about the concept of spaciousness that you see, in a lot of traditions, like in Zen Buddhism, of just being very spacious. So what is can be. As it is, and that doesn't mean that like you don't have judgments, that doesn't mean that you don't have ideas, but it's like an awareness. It's an awareness of, okay, I see that that's a judgment, And I know that judgments always limit, even if that judgment is a judgment of this is not in alignment with my values, but when you start to sort of like prescribe a label onto a thing, that's when my capacity to hold it all as it is becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. And so I love what you mentioned about being able to practice discernment, by not, and at the same time, practice not rejecting what's in front of us. Because I think that will help us navigate, because we're not ignoring anything, where it's like this,
Exactly.
it's this, I had this experience once where I was able to, in lots of spiritual traditions, there's a deep understanding and rejection of fear. And I think I had an experience last summer that made me understand the difference between fearful thoughts and fear as like an embodied experience, where fearful thoughts take us away from the present moment. It often is really grounded in the past, or it's really grounded in the future, what's going to happen or what, and can that be connected to what did happen in the past, which I don't want, But then when our bodies experience fear, what actually happens is that it really drops us into the present moment. And from that point, we're able to see everything that's going on and make the best decisions for our safety in that moment in order to move forward and to deepen into safety. And so I think it's important for us to discern between fearful thoughts and an embodied response to a threatening stimuli. And that just reminds me of that, where there's something really powerful, and we don't need fear to go into this, because we can be in this experience at all times of, I'm present, I'm seeing everything that's going around me so I can make informed decisions moving forward. Rejection of what's going on because it's painful, or because we don't like it, or because that aversion, it might serve a part of us that feels like we don't have capacity to hold that. But it limits our capacity to meet what the thing that we're rejecting can actually, like how it can assist us in our path moving forward. And so that's why so much of this is about capacity building. How can I build my capacity through building networks of safety within myself and outside of myself? How can I build my connection to life in order to assist me in holding the truth of this situation, of this moment, of this world, of this time, so that I can move forward within a space of knowing all of this, instead of being, hiding, let me not say hiding, but rejecting it out of fear. Like, I think the more we are able to observe what's unfolding, the more we can make sure that the seeds we plant are grounded in an understanding, like, this can't happen again. It won't happen again. It doesn't have to happen again. So there's something really important about building our capacity to hold it all, not to become consumed, but to really be able to hold it and see it and be, okay, what am I going to do with this? I say all the time, it's in our hands. It's out of our hands, and it's also in our hands. And so we just have to.
I suppose that's exactly what I've been trying to do, is process trauma and confront the shadow. And you were talking about self-inquiry, and it's almost like you're talking about that as a collective kind of moment where we confront the shadow. And I think that's really important. We have to look at the dark side and process that. So everything you said there really seemed to relate to what I've been building emotional resilience. Although I do think that trauma causes a disconnect from the self. Certainly for me, not for everyone, but I think there's a dissociation there, and there's a danger in that. So, I think it does have to be processed and
the more we process, the deeper our healing.
Yes.
And I'm happy you mentioned that you're walking that process individually, because my understanding of domination consciousness was grounded in recovering from my own individual traumas and seeing that the systems of oppression they're historical traumas, they're collective traumas. And so a lot of the individual healing, I think many people have been walking, are really, I think, can really assist us in understanding what it looks like as a collective to heal from the traumas that have ruptured our relationships within each other. So
very much.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Great. Yes. No, really. Thank you so much. I think we've reached the end of this. I could see that we could keep this so much that we could keep pursuing, but thank you very much, Lorraine, for bringing great
Oh, thank you.
tips. And Sydney, I don't know if there's anything you'd like to close with, but
I think the only thing I would like to close with, because I know many people are afraid, and because there's a lot that's unknown and a lot that's uncertain. And I wanted to share something that has assisted and continues to assist me in having a lot of faith and trust in this moment and in humanity as we navigate this moment. And it's really just an understanding that as we go deeper into our healing and remembering who it is that we are beyond domination consciousness, we remember our oneness and belonging to each other, but we also remember our oneness with life, and that we are expressions of life just as much as the water is, and the wind and the trees and the ants. And I know that no matter what happens, and no matter what emerges from this moment in time, life continues. And I wanted to offer that reminder because it honors also this truth that we can't become attached to the outcomes of our actions, but we can act sincerely. And I think most people want life to continue. Most people want humanity to continue in ways that are, aligned with life's flourishing. And so I think that honestly, honor that, act sincerely with what you feel in your heart is true and possible for our world. And when it comes our time to pass the baton to the next generation, we do that. But know that no matter what, life persists. However that looks, I can't say, but I know for a fact. And that gives me fear. That gives me faith. I don't have fear navigating this path because I know life continues, and I hope you do as well.
Thank you, Sydney.
That's
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you
Guys.
for coming and being with us. It's been a wonderful session, and thank you so much. It's great to connect with you more deeply, and I hope we can continue to do so.
Yes, no, absolutely. Well, thank you. And we will send Sydney's, your contact details to your website and your Substack and the various work you're doing. So we'll all have access to be hopefully seeing you very soon, Sydney, in terms of our work going forward.
Absolutely. Thank you all. Take good care.